So first of all, a very warm welcome to all of you here and joining us virtually, and especially also to our two panelists today. That we have Rainer from the Stadt Zurich, as well as Christoph joining us virtually from the State Secretary of Finance from Switzerland. What are we going to look at today? We have roughly 10 minutes, I guess, so let's cut it short. We want to see what is actually the role of states and governmental entities in this whole endeavors of climate change. There are commitments all over, as you've heard a lot talking today, and especially also in all those conferences, Glasgow, etc. But now, how can we make those things happen, and where are still the challenges, and where can we maybe cooperate? My name is Martina. I'm CMO at Loanboox. This is Europe's leading platform for debt capital for public sector authorities and also for big corporations. So therefore, we thought that might be an interesting subject to discuss here. With no further ado, very warm welcome to the both of you. Christoph, maybe you can quickly start and say, what is actually Switzerland doing in terms of sustainable finance, and how does that maybe compare to other countries?
Thank you very much. So as a member of the government, I have to choose my words carefully. So let me start with a quotation from the former Secretary General of the OECD. We need a big fat tax on carbon. And that's what I want to say with that is we need the right framework conditions for the markets to actually transition towards net zero. And the most efficient one in the instrument we have is a price on carbon. So we really need to do this. We're doing that nationally, but we're also promoting this internationally. And in the absence of achieving that, given that it's a difficult thing to do on a global scale, we need as much as possible decision-ready transparency for the financial market and for other actors to really support these transitions. I'm convinced that current consumers and current investors, they want to invest much more sustainable than maybe previous generations, but the transparency is not yet there, it's not yet comparable enough, it's not yet meaningful enough, and it's not yet forward-looking enough. So that's what we have a very strong focus on achieving that, especially in the area of climate.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Let's maybe switch side for now to look at the city. So you have described a bit the hat a government has on. Now, how is that for a city? Maybe Rainer, you can elaborate a bit. What is Zurich doing in these regards?
Yeah, we are right now in the middle of the final discussions of implementing net zero until 2040 in the city of Zurich. Some feedback. And basically, we are also very much dependent on what is happening on cantonal and on the governmental level. So at the end of the day, we have to implement it, but we need also some overall regulations. And we would also be very happy if there would be a tax on carbon, in fact. But nevertheless, we want to be net zero for all our direct emissions until 2040. But in addition, many cities want to do that, but in addition, we also want to reduce our indirect emissions by 30%, because as a city, we believe we are not only responsible on what's happening within the city, we are very much also responsible, we are a city of trade and of commerce, and we also have a responsibility for the whole value chains. So we also want to take our responsibility to reduce what's happening in Latin America, in Brazil, in Asia. So we want to reduce that also by 30%.
Mm-hmm. And what's now, maybe we can stay with you, Rainer, for a second. What's now the influence or kind of, how can finance help in these regards?
Basically, we cannot do it alone as a city, so we are more like the regulators. We can some things we can really not allow it anymore, but at the end of the day we have to collaborate very much with all also the private actors. Mm-hmm. And therefore I think it's very important that we collaborate also with finance partners to build like funds where, let's say, startups or also bigger companies can really benefit if they really do action to reduce their emissions. So that's very important for us. I think we can only directly influence about 10% of the city, and 90% are really private actors, and I think their finance plays a key role.
That's super important. Christoph, can you maybe elaborate a bit? You told before about kind of the carbon price. Can you elaborate a bit? What's your vision, or what's the vision there, and what is Switzerland currently doing in these regards?
Sure. So Switzerland is used to be on quite a good track. We have currently, with 96 francs per tons emitted on fossil fuels, a carbon tax. This will increase to 120 francs next year. But other countries are keeping up, and there's still quite a gap towards where we globally need to be. And the higher one country has in a carbon price, the higher there is a risk of a carbon leakage. So, meaning that some carbon-intensive industries are just leaving the country and going to another country, which you obviously don't want to. So there's developments in the European Union with a carbon border adjustment mechanism to kind of protect against this. And these are all interesting developments that really push this global discussion on we need a carbon tax. Unfortunately, still the opposite is true as well. There's still so much subsidies on fossil fuels in developing countries, and it's hard to deny developing countries some form of right to cheap energy as well, as we had. So it's a very difficult discussion without a clear bad guy, good guy scenario. We just really need to work towards increasing the carbon tax and reducing the subsidies.
Understood. If we try to wrap up, maybe one kind of key challenge and your potential solution that you have, or maybe also your wish. We are here at NOAH, so mainly connecting investors and startups. So maybe your take on that. I'll start with you, Rainer.
Yeah, so probably the main key challenge we have is that it's very easy for us to draw lines where we want to be in 20 years. But the challenge is really to follow these lines with the concrete action. So we have some low-hanging fruits, like replacing all the fossil heatings with renewable heatings. That's easy, but it's much more difficult in the consumption sector. It's also quite difficult in mobility. So for us, the key challenge is really to implement that huge reduction path and to really find the right action topics. And again, this is where we have to strongly collaborate with private actors, and I think also startups are very important to come with innovation. Also, probably it's also easy to reduce, let's say, the first 30% of carbon emissions, but then really but we have to reduce about 90%, and because we don't have much sinks, and I would say the last 10% it's much more difficult, and we don't have the solutions right now. And there we need a lot of innovation. I think the startups here, they play a key role here.
Super, thanks a lot for that. Christoph.
Yes, so we need really to be able to measure things. We need to measure impact, and we need to measure alignment of financial portfolios with the Paris Agreement, with the transition towards net zero. And that's why the Federal Council, Uli Maurer, announced earlier last week that we're working on a climate score together with the industry, together with universities and NGOs. This score really needs to be highest maximum credibility and the highest maximum of science-based approach possible to really have comparable transparency in the market. And I'm very convinced that investors will then shift their behaviors when they see it.
Exactly. I also think really a framework is what is first needed to also guide. I mean, now the city of Zurich obviously is a big player, but then if you look at more subnational entities, they don't have the means to actually come up with all of that. So therefore, this is very much needed from a state level or a EU or even bigger level to also foster that and make it easier for on one hand side the investors to invest in, and on the other hand side obviously also for the local authorities to handle it. So we're already at the end of our time. It was very interesting to have your views on that. If there's a last question from the audience, we can happily take that. Otherwise, let's wrap it up.